Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 10th of September 2018, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your host today, Mike Robinson, myself, Brian Gerrish.
Well, Brian, it's World Suicide Prevention Day, and Gavin Williamson, as if he cares, put out a statement about this. He said, "Every suicide is a tragedy, and as we mark World Suicide Prevention Day, we remember the importance of seeking help from our friends, family, or medical experts. I want to make sure that none of our serving personnel or veterans are suffering in silence. That's why I've launched our mental health helplines so that every individual knows where they can turn in times of crisis. We've also teamed up with the Samaritans to create a guide that will help our serving personnel to spot signs that their peers may be struggling." So that's from the Defence Secretary, or the Minister of War, as more appropriately titled, Gavin Williamson. He believes everything he's saying there, doesn't he?
Well, I'm sure he does. This has come about, Mike, because there's been reports over recent weeks of an alarming increase in suicides and at least mental health amongst Britain's armed forces. But we're not looking into the causes of that. We're simply saying, well, if you're unwell, if you're feeling off colour, then we're going to put in all these facilities to help you, which is drawing more and more people into the control of mental health attention.
Yes.
So the key bit for me on this is there's a problem. Nobody's looking into why we've got so many people with mental health issues in the armed forces, but we're going to make sure care is there for you if you suffer.
Well, while he's looking at potential suicide amongst individuals, we've got to ask, are we committing collective suicide here? And I'm not wanting to make light of the first item there, but this is getting pretty serious now, because Britain continues to poke sticks where it really doesn't need to be poking sticks. It's creating enemies that it doesn't need to create. And the only outcome I can see here, Brian, is either we're going to end up in a war that we don't need to be in, or these guys are going to cry wolf so many times that from a political standpoint, they're committing political suicide. I mean, this goes to the conversation I was having with Piers Robinson last night on the Sunday Wire about the whole Skripal thing. But here's Plymouth Live. Devonport warship HMS Albion saves face in Chinese confrontation. So this is HMS Albion, who decided they would sail it close to some of the Paracel Islands in this case. First of all, did they need to do that? They know what reaction they're going to get from the Chinese over it. So what was the point?
Well, you could say that this is crude gunship diplomacy, that you're sending a warship, therefore you're making a national, international statement that we mean business. But the laughable thing about this is that we cannot mean business because we haven't got the military capability anymore. So what have we got here? Amphibious ship sent as a target, presumably.
Presumably. Well, it goes on, because here is, we're only a few weeks now until exercise Trident Juncture. And here is NATO's propaganda. Now, if anybody digs out this little video clip that NATO pushed out today on Trident Juncture, the music that goes with it is fascinating. Unfortunately, the video is frozen there for some reason, not quite sure why. But anyway, the point here is NATO and the UK, United States, claiming that Russia becoming more and more dangerous ever since the so-called illegal annexation of Crimea. And so now they're going to run the largest exercise that they've ever run, 40,000 personnel and so on. Now they're busy complaining about the size and the scale of Russian exercises, which are taking place, in Russia. But we are going to bring together all these personnel sort of within the. Okay, this is based in Norway, but still, the target is Russia here. They're talking about potential enemies, but they're creating this enemy, are they not?
It certainly seem to be in the game. The other bit to this, Mike, is that in the Cold War days, these big exercises where you had a lot of troops ashore in Norway were always supported by very big naval exercises, which were all to do with bringing war supplies over the Atlantic. So this was practicing the convoy system to get all of the American hardware in place, without which you couldn't fight the war. And in particular, there were vast movements of ships up into the Norwegian Sea in order to provide air cover for the operations in Norway. None of this is taking place, and it can't take place because the Royal Navy as such does not have the capability to do what it did during the Cold War. So nobody's talking about this. We're pushing the rhetoric, we're pushing for these exercises, but there's nothing to back it up in UK. It's almost as if the American military is just the toy of Downing Street.
I think that's how Downing Street sees it.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, we have this type of nonsense from the Sunday Times, as published yesterday. British Army's exit from Germany delayed over Russia threat. And they say Gavin Williamson has ordered hundreds of British troops to remain in Germany to deter Russian aggression, the Sunday Times has learned. The Defence Secretary has decided to tear up plans to withdraw all forces from Germany by 2020 and will keep forward bases in the in the Central European plain. Williamson will issue a stark warning to Vladimir Putin at the Conservative Party conference this month after intelligence chiefs and military commanders told him Russia was at its most dangerous since the end of the Cold War. More than 200 servicemen and 400 family members will not be coming home as planned in the next year. Those due to remain in Germany include an engineering regiment and so on. So I'm sure Vladimir Putin, Brian, is quaking in his boots because 200 servicemen are going to remain in Germany. Aside from the fact, of course, Germany doesn't have a border with Russia, and so I'm not quite sure how that is going to deter anything. But, what do you think is the... by how much would that delay any Russian advance should they decide to move their way through?
It's not worth talking about, Mike. This is fake news that's being pushed to the nation because we're simply being told information as if it has got some value to it. It doesn't have any value. It's completely and utterly fake news. Well, this story perhaps does tell us something. The Independent here and most of the other national newspapers reporting on the fact that Queen Elizabeth, our new aircraft carrier without the aircraft, gone to America, and there's been a big punch up ashore with one or two of the sailors being tasered. Now, the only person who's commented on this is Lord West. This is the only man that now speaks on any subject to do with the Royal Navy, and he said, well, of course this stuff has always gone on. Actually, I don't think that's quite true, because although sailors have gone ashore, had too many beers and got involved in fights, it's unusual for there to be a punch-up between the crew itself. So this is what took place here. There's a quote, a sub-headline, "They beat the mess out of each other and fight each other more than anything, but once they pick their teeth off the ground, they're best friends." Now that's a quote that's come from an American police sergeant, I think, and I'll say that if we've got an aircraft carrier where the morale on board is so good that they're already fighting amongst each other, there's something seriously wrong with that ship. And of course, one of the things we know about the new aircraft carriers is that they've got manning problems. They do not have enough men and women to actually crew the ships effectively, and that must place a huge strain on that crew.
What's going on here? Are they bringing crews in from other ships just to try to man this one because it's a massive PR exercise?
Well, they've certainly had to drag everybody they can who's qualified in to try and man this ship, Mike. But all the stuff that we've read about the problems is that they simply have not got enough people, trained people, to man these ships. So everybody on board's going to be under huge pressure. And then we've got new solutions, like everybody's going to get GPS tracking so that they know where individuals are within the ship. Some of this sounds to me to be like breakdown. Whether it's that bad or not, I don't know. Well, where does that take us to? Well, the Minister for War has been checking out the new sacrifices, so I couldn't resist this one. Thoroughly enjoyed meeting the Air Cadets and Army Cadets UK in Enniskillen. A pleasure to see all the wonderful work that they're doing in Northern Ireland. So he's busy creating the wars with the Conservative Party, and these youngsters, most of whom want to serve their country, believe that they would be joining the armed forces for all the right reasons, defending the nation, friends and family, are going to be used as part of Theresa May's private army. And I'll just add that, of course, we've still got military boots on the ground in Syria, which David Cameron said would never happen. No vote in Parliament to put those troops into Syria. And of course, the Syrians didn't ask for British military support in the first place. So what are they doing there?
Well, last week we mentioned that Tony Blair had been speaking on BBC and really working towards splitting up the Labour Party. He said, if you remember, I don't think the British people will tolerate a situation where, for example, the choice at the next election is Boris Johnson versus Jeremy Corbyn. So he's working hard to make sure that that's not the case. And he aims to set up a new centrist party. Well, if that's on what's going on the left, on the right, we have Steve Baker MP saying that as many as 80 Conservative MPs are planning to vote against the so-called Chequers plan regarding Brexit. And this is according to Steve Baker. He, of course, resigned over the so-called Chequers plan, which is the blueprint that Theresa May is following at the minute for Brexit without the exit. And he says that the level of opposition means that Theresa May faces a massive problem at the upcoming Conservative Party conference. And so he was giving an interview to the Press Association, and he said, if we come out of the conference with her hoping to get Chequers through on the back of Labour votes, I think the EU negotiators would probably understand that if that were done, the Tory party would suffer a catastrophic split, which thus far we've managed to avoid. He said, we're reaching the point now where it's extremely difficult to see how we can rescue the Conservative Party from a catastrophic split if the Chequers proposals are carried forward. It is absolutely no pleasure whatsoever to me to acknowledge that. But I look at the mood of colleagues and the mood of the Conservative Party in the country, and I'm gravely concerned for the future of our party. So clearly, Brian, what we're looking at is some kind of deep state operation to split up the traditional political parties.
Yeah, without question.
Right, and Theresa May has to be complicit in this, or at least, or maybe stupid enough not to realise that it's going on around her. But what are we going to end up with? Tony Blair in charge of some kind of centrist party at the end of it? Yeah. This is a pretty.
It's an amazing coincidence, isn't it, that the European Union was brought in on a pack of lies back in the 70s. Now we can't make a national decision to come out, even though 17.4 million people voted for it. And at this very moment, politicians can't come to any sort of agreement. So our political system is beginning to fall apart as we're saying that the Russians are the biggest threat ever seen. This is engineered. I don't think there can be any doubt it's an engineered political situation.
Absolutely. And in the meantime, the Sunday Times at it again, because yesterday they published this: police plan for riots and crime wave if there is no deal Brexit. They're saying police chiefs are drawing up contingency plans to deal with widespread civil disorder if the country's at the country's borders and ports in the event of a no-deal Brexit, according to a leaked report. The bombshell document prepared by the National Police Coordination Centre warns that, quote, the necessity to call in military assistance is a real possibility in the weeks around Britain's departure from the EU. Well, that report is going to go to the National Police Chiefs Council next week when they have their annual meeting, or a significant meeting anyway. And this is Chief Constable Charlie Hall from the National Police Chiefs Council, who's saying that there's no intelligence to suggest there would be an increase in crime or disorder if the UK and the EU cannot agree a deal. This is direct response to the Sunday Times article. And he's concerned, he says, that this document, or at least the publication of it, could feed civil disorder, widespread protest, which would then escalate into disorder, and So, again, they're playing with people's minds here, Brian. This
So
type of article is exactly the type of thing we might expect from the Nudge Unit, perhaps.
So we've got a senior police officer warning that a government indirectly created document could lead to civil unrest. Right. Okay, well, let's have a look at Colonel Kemp, who we've mentioned in several times over the last few days. So this man was head of the Cobra Intelligence Committee. He was also part of the security element of the Cabinet Office from 2001 to 2006. And we pointed out that in a BBC news article, which is as an excerpt on screen at the moment, that he was busy saying, yes, well, we did fail to pick up on the fact that we had Islamic extremists and terrorists coming into the UK. But nobody was at fault there, Mike, you understand. We just made a little bit of a mistake because we opened the doors and let these people come in. Then we've discovered that they're going to be a bit of trouble. Well, what's he saying now? I found this very interesting. Thank you to the person who picked this one up. So he'd been tweeting out to do with armed police. I agree with that, but in the 21st century, all police should also be armed to protect the public and to protect themselves. It will happen, and no doubt plans are already being put in place. Now, when he says it will happen, Mike, I believe that this is because this man would know that it was going to happen because he's been sitting in these intelligence committees meetings.
He may well have written the plans, or at least had some contribution to them.
Yeah, so I'm going to say what's going on here. Well, I think we didn't get it wrong by a mistake. We got it wrong because we knew what the effect was. The door was opened. The extremists were allowed into this country. This wasn't negligence. This was planned action. And then one of the spin-offs of having the extremists in the country is we can wind up the propaganda to make people fearful, and then we can say very gently, well, you need armed police to protect you. So this is engineered, in my opinion, without any doubt at all, but let's follow it along with this. And another big thank you to a UK column viewer for pointing out this latest movement on the PREVENT strategy. So here's the main man. This is Bob Wallace, MP, Minister of State for Security, and he was announcing recently, 5th of September, that there was a new PREVENT strategy document, the so-called PREVENT Duty Toolkit for local authorities and partner agencies. And you can obviously freeze the screen there and have a look at the detail, but this is being pushed as very, very important documentation around a very important strategy that everybody needs to get on board. Otherwise, we won't be safe, Mike. This is the key thing. But what caught my eye with this was the importance given to local authorities, and we'll come on to this. Here's the document. I found it interesting that it's a PREVENT Duty Toolkit. So toolkit is rather light-hearted. It's the sort of thing you're going to use to sort out. We've got a bit of a toolkit to sort that out, but it's your duty to do this. So I think this is behavioural change type stuff. They're using applied behavioural psychology, but I can imagine the reaction of local authorities. Well, this is just the sub-introduction. PREVENT Duty Toolkit, supplementary information to the PREVENT Duty guidelines for England and Wales. This is the sort of topics that it covers: local risk, multi-agency partnership board. Everything's becoming multi-agency, no separation of powers, everything drawn together.
Fusion doctrine.
Fusion, absolutely. Referral process, channel panel, PREVENT problem solving process, training program, venue hire and IT policies, community and civil society engagement. So a lot of stuff in this document, and I'm going to encourage our viewers and listeners to read it because it is so dangerous. Here it is under the Counter-Terrorism Security Act 2015. It requires all specified authorities to have due regard to the need to prevent people from being drawn into terrorism. Local authorities and their partners therefore have a core role to play in countering terrorism at local level and helping to safeguard individuals at risk of radicalisation. So no longer, Mike, is your local authority there to make sure that the roads are surfaced and the schools work serving the public. No, they are now a powerful arm of government,
Intelligence
service to make sure that this central government policy is going through, and it does get pretty bad. Let me just catch up with myself so that I can read some of the stuff on the second screen. So what have we got? Local risk assessment process. Is there a local risk assessment process which informs an action plan and is disseminated to partners? Expectation of compliance. So this is the government telling local authorities there to do this.
From the beginning of whenever the Big Society was announced, Brian, Big Society was being presented as locals making local decisions about their local communities, and we said no, this is about centralised control at the local level.
Yeah, this is it.
And they're talking about required compliance.
Yeah.
Yes.
This is it. This is the government, power of the government coming down to the local level. So we've got, is there a local risk assessment process which informs an action plan and is disseminated to partners? Now, what they're saying is you've got to be spying on people. You've got to be watching what's happening in your area, and if you think there's something wrong, you are going to be reported. This is not the police, this is local authority. The prevent duty requires all local authorities to utilise the local counter-terrorism local profile, CTLP, to inform a robust assessment of the risks of radicalisation in the local area and produce a proportionate partnership action plan to tackle these risks. Everything drawn together. And if we have a look at this bit, contributing to the CTLP, it says local authorities are a key partner in countering terrorism at local level. Whilst the police, therefore, while the CTLP is produced by the police, it's imperative that local authorities and their partners contribute to it. Local authorities should play a central role. Information provided by local authorities. So essentially now you've got a mixture of the security services, GCHQ, and anti-terrorism operating from Plymouth City Council, Sheffield City Council. This is very, very dangerous stuff. So let's go on. We've got delivering benchmarks, and we begin to see more and more what's actually going on here. Let's just blow that up on screen a bit. The organisation has a local risk assessment process. Well, we've spoken about that. Multi-agency board, spoken about that. Prevent partnership plan, agreed process in place for the referral of those identified as being at risk. Channel panel in place, meeting monthly. So this is not something where you've got to document if something happens. This is being driven on a week by week, day by day, month by month basis. And what I picked up here, Mike, and it caught my eye, and I just thought, wow, there is a venue hire policy in place to ensure that premises are not used by radicalising influencers, and an effective IT policy in place to prevent the access of extremist materials by users of networks. So who are these radicalising influencers? Whoever the local authority thinks they are, they can block venues. And of course, what came into my mind straight away was the media on trial, where venues were constantly blocked and nobody would say why. So I think we can say, was the media on trial event blocked by Prevent Strategy in Leeds? Well, of course, the answer is we're not going to know, because if we dig into this a little bit more, what do we find? We start to get into secrecy. It says the CTLP should be an official, sensitive, restricted document. The minimum security clearance required for access to official, sensitive, restricted information is baseline personnel security standard. However, the CTLP should include recommendations for activity against risk, which should be shared amongst all appropriate partners. So if you try and find out what your local authority is doing, did you ban our venue, you're not going to get very far, because the key people are all working under more or less official secrets. So this is the gulag. And this bit, community engagement, if you read this paragraph, what you'll see them saying is that we can't do this unless we engage the community. Positive community engagement is vital for PREVENT. A lack of community buy-in could negatively affect delivery across all the sectors covered. So they need the lowest possible level of communities to be brought into this Stasi spying system, otherwise it won't work. So I think we're being told how to counter it is we've got to make sure that communities are warned that what this actually is a very dangerous state intervention into people's lives. It's there on a plate. Did they block media on trial? If they did, we can now see that it's not Islamic extremists or terrorists that are worrying the government. It's anybody who dares stand up and challenge the government policy. And we'll just add this one in as well, because a sharp-eyed viewer picked it up, and that is that the government has been solidifying its security vetting. Now, originally, for the military at least, security vetting to make sure that you were not a security risk was carried out by the top level of the military, working with the security services, and they operated in that particular area. What's happening now is that anybody who's going to get some form of security clearance is going to be cleared by one national security vetting authority.
Is this going to be still going to be a government agency, or is this going to be outsourced to some private company?
Well, I would guess, Mike, that it's going to be outsourced to a private company, but what we've got happening here is the National Audit Office is actually saying we've got to see whether there's value for money at the moment. There won't be, and that will be used as the excuse to bring in the private company who will do the security vetting. And of course, if you put through for higher level security clearance, the intrusion into your personal life and family life is quite considerable, because these people are asking some very personal and detailed questions. But Mike, you hit the nail on the head, because you mentioned what the overall policy was. We're going to remind people here that it was David Cameron, of course, that unleashed Big Society. And if you look at the back of Big Society, you come to Saul Alinsky, a Marxist, and it's his ideology that was adopted by the Conservative Party. They said that in some of their own material.
Well, let's talk about Tony Blair again, because, Mint Press here, the headline is Tony Blair confirms receiving millions in donations from Saudi Arabia. They're saying that the Tony Blair Institute wrote flattering articles about bin Salman during his Crown Prince visit to the UK last year. Tony Blair's relationship with Saudi Arabia has come under scrutiny following the revelation that the non-government organisation set up under his name has received millions of pounds from Riyadh. Accounts published yesterday by the Tony Blair Institute confirmed earlier reports that Blair had received donations of up to $12 million from the kingdom. The Saudi donation, according to the Financial Times, comes from an organisation called Media Investment Limited, which is a subsidiary of Saudi Research and Marketing Group, registered in Guernsey. Publication of the accounts confirmed July reports the Tony Blair Institute had made an agreement with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, effective ruler of Saudi Arabia, earlier in the year to help with a program of modernisation for the kingdom. And of course, the photograph that they have there is Tony Blair chuckling with Prince Bandar. Well, Brian, I think it was last week you were highlighting once again, reminding us that Brooks Newmark had been over on the Turkish-Syrian border in 2013, speaking to General Idris in Syria, and making him all sorts of promises about what the British were going to do, about raining bombs down on Assad, if I remember rightly. Yep. And then a week later, after the vote in Parliament, which decided that we weren't going to bomb Syria, Brooks Newmark was publishing articles in the Daily Mail, which have since been removed, but can still be found on the Wayback Machine, where he was saying, you know, what am I going to tell General Idris now? Well, in fact, what happened was that Prince Bandar there pulled together all the various so-called rebel factions, moderate and jihadist, and brought them together into one consolidated, you know, within limits. This was his effort. So I'm fascinated by this this photograph here, and I would just ask, I wonder what influence Tony Blair has in Saudi Arabia with regard to policy in Syria, and I wonder what influence or what sort of friendship there is between these two men.
Well, they just pay him, Mike. He's bought, isn't he?
Well,
is Tony Blair intelligent enough to come out with the policy, or is he the man who runs off and does the policy?
well, I don't know. But anyway, in the meantime, obviously Idlib continuing to be in the headlines. Foreign fighters in Syria's Idlib face last stand, according to AFP here. Hailing from far and wide, they flocked to Syria to wage holy war. I'm just slightly fascinated that this article is admitting, because, you know, in Britain we wouldn't necessarily see that type of commentary, because we don't want to admit in the British press, apparently, that the people that are left in Idlib, in the last bastion of the rebel-held territories in Syria, are from far and wide, flocking to Syria to wage a holy war, because apparently everybody that's in Idlib is civilians, and we're going to bomb civilians. Of course, this is not truth. This is not true, and the France 24 article here it brings us a bit closer to the truth than perhaps British mainstream media would be prepared to mention. But in the meantime, as this operation in Idlib prepares to get started, we're not quite sure when the Syrian army is going to actually launch their attack on Idlib. But in preparation for that, YouTube is making sure that all Syrian state channels, according to Duran here, have been shut down, including Assad's and the Syrian government's YouTube channel, but SARS and other Syrian news agency YouTube channels being taken offline as well.
Yeah, so the public, you're not going to be able to see anybody else's opinion as to what's happening.
Absolutely.
And interesting that over the weekend, Mike, there was that report that 200 US personnel plus British and I think some Dutch were still in the Idlib area. They were trying to get out via Turkey, but Turkey was apparently refusing that. And that information was originally posted by, and it's gone out of my head, but if you have a look at our Twitter page, you'll see the reports on that. Rodney Atkinson, yeah. Free Nations is where that information was posted originally. We haven't got any more details on that, but it does seem likely, but certainly US and British special forces operating in this area, have they now been trapped? As Assad's forces close in? We wait to see. Well, let's have a look at the BBC. It didn't take long in the BBC's latest reports to see more what's really utter lies. There's no other way of putting it. This was the paragraph I picked up on. What do we know of recent chemical weapons use? The Syrian government has denied ever using chemical weapons. However, experts from the UN and the Organisation for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons have said government forces were behind an attack involving the nerve agent sarin on a rebel-held town in southern Idlib in April 2017 that killed more than 80 people. Well, that's absolutely not true, because that has never been said. The Syrian government has never been held responsible. The evidence has never been produced. The investigation has never taken place. So this has got to be labelled as BBC fake news. But of course, this is very dangerous stuff. So we withdraw comment from other news sources, Mike. That gets censored, but the BBC can pump out what it likes.
Well, indeed. I mean, what they're saying about the OPCW there is simply wrong, as you say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they know it. So why is there a war in Syria? Well, I have to keep putting this up. Let's remember that it was the BBC's own BBC Media Action that boasted it had people on the ground helping to stir up opinion against Assad. So the BBC helped to create the war in Syria. And I'm going to say, I think the higher levels of the BBC knew full well it was going to lead to violence, even if this lady, Julia Harkin, was so naive to think she was there doing a good job for the BBC. And let's remind people why this is so important, because at the moment we only need war and terror to grow, to be able to kick off the full prevent strategy, and we're then in a dictatorship. So the BBC really surpassing itself over the last couple of days, because whilst it doesn't want to tell the truth about war, its trash content is increasing by the week. So I had a look at Must See. That's the BBC's label. This is news that the BBC says you must see. And I suppose I'm a bloke. My attention was drawn to the label here. The sex tech inventor closing the orgasm gap. Now remember, this is must-see news by the BBC. Let's have a look at it. Now, actually, I'm not going to go into the content, because what I was more interested in was who had produced this rubbish. And of course, on the main page for this article, BBC main page for this article, we've got video journalist Hannah Gelbart. And I thought, well, let's have a look at Miss Gelbart. And here she is on her Twitter page. Former JTS trainee, Spanish and Portuguese speaker. Got a story, let me know. All views my own. Well, I was just a little bit fascinated as to what the JTS was. So I did a little bit of investigation on that. And what it appears to be is a journalism trainee scheme from the BBC. Now, I think this is stalled at the moment. I don't think they're taking new trainees. But basically, what is it about? Well, it says they're saying here that during the 11-month scheme, you'll get training with the BBC Academy while working alongside news teams in placements with online, digital, radio, TV news. These placements will offer you hands-on experience involving researching, writing and broadcasting news. So the BBC has taught this young lady, so let's not point the finger directly at her. Who's taught her what is news and what's not? It's the BBC Academy. And this is the best bit for me. 11-month course pays £20,800 per annum. If you're based in London, the salary is £25,360. We also cover travel and accommodation during training periods, first-rate training by the BBC, so that you can pump out articles which are simply promoting a company producing sex toys.
I thought the BBC wasn't allowed advertisements. I mean,
Well,
that's effectively what it was. It wasn't labelled as an infomercial.
Well, you see more and more of these things, Mike. Well, the BBC is the law unto itself, but this is absolutely crass stuff. We can't report on Melanie Shaw as one example. We can't report on what's really happening in child abuse, but we can produce a documentary advertising a young lady who's producing sex toys. Well, let's just come back to national politics at the moment. And over the weekend, many people circulated a video clip of Tommy Robinson. I found this extraordinary, Mike, because he's basically on screen pleading to be let into UKIP. Those nasty people in UKIP, the National Board, sorry, I can't
National
think, Executive Committee, say they're going to have a think about it. But even though Gerard Batten is this man's best friend, they're being very nasty and not allowing him in at the moment. So we just remind ourselves that Tommy Robinson over recent weeks only able to do what he's been doing, which is get out of prison with the help of a very, very pro-Israel organisation, the Middle East Forum. If Tommy Robinson goes into UKIP, UKIP has become extreme right-wing, it seems to me. So does this then clear political ground for the centrist party?
Indeed. I mean, clearly there are lots of shenanigans going on within the political system in this country at the moment.
Yeah, so we collapsed the Labour Party with anti-Semitism. That's the techniques being used to attack Corbyn. And then we used Brexit.
And who's driving that? The Zionist factions. And who's driving this? Middle East Forum, the Zionist factions.
This is true, Mike. Well, I also learned this, excuse me, over the weekend, which I didn't know. I knew that there'd been support in UKIP for Israel. I didn't realise there was a UKIP Friends of Israel. So what does it have to say here? It says, UKIP Friends of Israel exists to promote solidarity and understanding between the membership of the UK Independence Party and the people of Israel. UKIP has long advocated the need for all freedom-loving people to show their support for Israel. As a libertarian, capitalist, democratic party, UKIP is a mutual friend of the world's only Jewish state. Well, at one stage I was foolish enough to be a member of UKIP, and I wasn't aware this was going on, so they didn't have my vote on that subject. This is a bit more about it, which you can find on the little website. They're saying that this was the stall at one of their Torquay conferences, and if you want to get involved, there's a contact address. I simply ask the same question that I keep asking with the other mainstream parties. Why do we have a foreign power, Israel, directly interfering in the political parties of UK? So we've got Labour Friends of Israel, Conservative Friends of Israel. We've now got UKIP Friends of Israel. We've got Tommy Robinson backed by Israel. What would people be saying if the backing was from Germany or from Italy? People will be asking questions. Perhaps those questions need to be asked.
Well, if there's lots of reorganisation going on within the political party system, of course, the boundary review for political constituencies, well, that report has now been written and published. It's being presented to Parliament today, so this is a boundary commission for England. Our final recommendations were presented to government on the 5th of September 2018 and will be published here once the government presents them to Parliament. Well, as I say, that's taking place today. They're saying it's now up to the government to lay the report before Parliament. The Boundary Commission cannot publish the report or announce its recommendations until that's been done. Well, what are the recommendations? Roughly, the proposed number of seats for the next general election in England will fall to 501 from 533. In Scotland will come down from 59 to 53. In Wales will come down from 40 to 29. And Northern Ireland will lose 1 seat down to 17 from 18. As well as reducing the number of seats, they're going to make constituencies more equal in size, Brian, so that constituencies will contain somewhere between 71 and 78,000 people. So they're going to mess with the boundaries. Now the question is, what is that going to do to the final result of any general election? Perhaps we're going to end up with boundaries being drawn in such a way that a centrist party might benefit from this rather than Labour or Conservatives. At the moment, the discussion is all about whether the Conservative Party is going to benefit from the boundary changes. But in fact, I suspect that this might be being done with the new political landscape, or at least how they perceive the new political landscape to be, rather than any sort of Conservative Labour thing.
The minimum is it's change, and it's going to create confusion and uncertainty with with both the political parties and their supporters and their campaigners. But we're also seeing these boundary changes happen right down at the lowest level. So you've got an intent to change the boundaries for parishes, for example, to bring them together into larger units. The moment that happens, of course, you lose the local feedback because nobody's really interested in a boundary where it includes too big an area because you don't understand that area. So this is dismantling the political landscape. I think it's deliberate. Okay, we'll end there. But final comment is that I've had some emails in over the weekend suggesting that child abuse whistleblower Melanie Shaw is now in some form of psychiatric hospital. I do not know what the situation is at the moment, but if anybody has got informative information from the right sources about what's happened to her. We'd like to know. What does this show us? Well, just as the British government is implementing the PREVENT strategy, where the local authorities are going to be spying on us to the nth degree, those people who stand up to be counted and challenge the government on whatever the subject is are going to be faced with branded as extreme or troublemakers and ultimately put in a psychiatric gulag. Gavin Williamson hasn't been standing up suggesting that there should have been this sort of help for Melanie Shaw. Mike, I wonder if that's because he was a whip and the Tory whip policy is to cover up whatever the problem is, because then they will do as we wish. Tim Fortescue's quote to the BBC. We'll leave it there. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.